He looked me in the eye after 50 years of marriage and said coldly, "I only married you for your money." But he had no idea that I was quietly preparing to destroy his reputation forever. If you've ever felt used or betrayed, stick with me until the end. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Helena Costa. I'm 75 years old, and for 5 decades, I believed I had lived the perfect marriage. From the outside, everything looked flawless. I was an elegant woman, a successful business owner in real estate, admired by friends and envied by many. I had built a strong family, raised children with love, and stood beside my husband, Renato. Through all of life's storms, we built our home brick by brick, vacationed in beautiful places, and celebrated every anniversary as though we were the definition of what lasting love should be. But there was always something I never said out loud. A quiet discomfort that settled deep within me during lonely nights when Renato would roll over in bed without even saying "I love you." A hollowness in the way he kissed, dutiful, mechanical, never passionate. For years, I told myself that this was just how marriage became after decades together. That passion faded, and companionship replaced it. But deep down, I always wondered, did he truly love me? Or had he simply grown comfortable in the life we had built? Looking back, there were always signs I refused to see. The way he admired wealth in others, the way his eyes lit up at the mention of money, status, and power, far more than they ever did when he looked at me. Renato was charming, generous in public, and always knew how to make people like him. But in private, he was distant, cold, calculated. I used to think it was just stress, the weight of being a man responsible for a family. I remember early in our marriage, he would always ask about my business, my investments, my plans, but never about my feelings, my dreams, or what kept me awake at night. I mistook his interest in my work for pride in my accomplishments. But now I know better. He was calculating, watching, ensuring that the life I built would secure him as well. For years, I suffocated these doubts. We had children to raise, appearances to maintain. I was terrified of what would happen if I dared confront him about my suspicions. What if I was wrong? What if I destroyed everything we had built on a hunch? And truthfully, I didn't want to know. Sometimes, ignorance feels safer than truth. I kept convincing myself that love expresses itself in different ways. Maybe he wasn't affectionate, but he provided, he stayed, he never left me. That had to count for something, right? That's what I told myself as we celebrated our 20th, 30th, and even 50th wedding anniversaries, surrounded by family and friends, toasting to a love that I now know never really existed. The image of our perfect life became my prison. I couldn't talk to anyone about my doubts. How do you tell your children that their father might never have loved their mother? How do you admit to your friends who see you as the embodiment of elegance and success that your marriage might have been a lie? So I smiled in family photos, hosted lavish dinners, and continued playing my role. But inside, I was withering, carrying a quiet, invisible grief that no one could see. The grief of knowing but not knowing, of suspecting but never confirming. Now, when I think about it, I realize how deeply I craved his love. Not his protection, not his financial support. Never needed that. I was always strong, always capable. But I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had. I wanted to feel chosen, cherished, adored. And for 50 years, I clung to the hope that maybe, just maybe, he did love me in his own way. Until the day he looked me straight in the eyes and confessed the truth that shattered everything. That day changed me forever. But before I tell you what happened, I need you to understand who I was. A woman who built her life on the illusion of love, who sacrificed her own doubts for the sake of family, who wore strength like armor but quietly bled beneath it. And I know there are many of you out there who understand this feeling all too well. That silent ache, that buried suspicion, that fear of finding out that the love you invested your whole life into was never real. If you've ever felt used, taken for granted, or trapped by appearances, stay with me. My story is your story, and if you're here listening to me now, know that this is a safe space. Subscribe to Confession Stories and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Let's walk through this truth together. It happened on the night that was supposed to be the most beautiful celebration of our lives, our golden anniversary. 50 years of marriage, 50 years of partnership, or so I thought, surrounded by family, friends, our children, and grandchildren. I stood up and gave a heartfelt speech. I thanked Renato for being my partner, for all the years of shared dreams, for the life we built together. My voice trembled with emotion, my eyes filled with tears, and I believed, or wanted to believe, that behind his stoic expression there was the same gratitude, the same love. But as the applause faded, as people returned to their wine glasses, In quiet conversations, he leaned towards me without even a smile and said, "Helena, come with me. We need to talk." His voice was flat, cold, mechanical. We walked into the empty study at the back of the house, a place where we had once planned vacations, chosen schools for our children, made decisions about our investments. It was the room where our life as a couple had always been built, brick by brick, decision after decision, and there, standing by the window, looking out at the garden lights. He said it, "I only married you for your money." Just like that, no hesitation, no guilt, no shame. And then, as if twisting the knife deeper into my heart, he added, "I always loved someone else." I stood there frozen, as if the walls of that room, the very foundations of my life, were crumbling all at once. 50 years, erased in a single sentence. Do you know that feeling when your entire reality disintegrates right before your eyes? When everything you thought was true suddenly becomes a cruel, unbearable lie? That's exactly what I felt. A cold, paralyzing shock that numbed every part of me. In that moment, all the memories, the weddings, the birthdays, the quiet Sunday mornings, the long vacations, all of them, suddenly seemed hollow, meaningless. But what Renato didn't know was that I already knew. For years, I had known about his affairs. I had known about the late nights at the office that had nothing to do with work. I had seen the messages he tried to delete, the credit card charges. He couldn't explain the cologne. I didn't buy him. The hotel stays he thought were invisible. I knew about his addictions too. The gambling, the secret bank accounts, the endless pursuit of power and status that consumed him more than any real love ever could. And I had stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was strong. Strong enough to protect my children from the truth when they were young. Strong enough to keep the family together when everything in me wanted to walk away. Strong enough to keep the illusion alive because I thought that was the right thing to do. But now he had confessed. Not because he was sorry, not because he wanted to make amends, but because, finally, after 50 years, he felt safe enough to say it out loud, thinking that at 75, what could I possibly do? That I would be too broken, too old, too tired to fight back. What he didn't realize is that I had been preparing for this moment for years. I had the evidence, I had the knowledge, I had the truth, and I was no longer afraid. The mask had fallen. The man I once believed in, the man I had sacrificed so much for, was standing in front of me, exposed for what he truly was. A man driven not by love, but by lust. Lust for wealth, for status, for power, never for me. And I knew that the time had come for me to do what I had never dared to do before. Take back my story, you see. Sometimes the truth doesn't break you. It sets you free. If you've ever been betrayed, used, or reduced to a role in someone else's game, stay with me, because what I did next would change everything. And maybe it can change you too. Looking back, I realize now that the signs were always there, hidden in plain sight, like cracks beneath a flawless surface. From the very beginning, Renato was far more interested in the value of my family's estate than in me. At first, I mistook it for ambition. He asked too many questions about our properties, about how the inheritance was structured, about the businesses my father ran. He always said he admired how strong I was, how independent, how successful, but deep down, I can see now that he admired the wealth I represented, not the woman I was. The first year of our marriage was marked by his frequent absences, business trips, he said, meetings, important clients. I wanted to believe him. Every wife wants to believe. But even then, I noticed how he looked at other women when he thought I wasn't paying attention, how his eyes lingered a little too long, how he smiled with that charm he used so easily, like a mask he wore for everyone but me. As the years passed, the absences grew longer, the excuses more elaborate. I found receipts for dinners I wasn't invited to, expensive gifts I never received. Once, I found a lipstick in his car, subtle nude-colored, the kind I never wore. When I confronted him, he laughed it off, said, "It must belong to a client or one of our daughters." I wanted to believe him, but my gut screamed otherwise. Then, one evening years ago, I was organizing the drawer in his study when I found it, a small, elegant card tucked beneath a stack of papers. At first glance, it looked like a business card, but the name on it wasn't familiar. I flipped it over, and my heart sank. A membership to an exclusive private club. Curious, I searched the name online, and what I found shattered something inside me. It was a club for men who sought fantasies, private, luxurious, and hidden from public view. A place where they could live out their desires without consequence, with women who were paid handsomely to fulfill whatever they wanted. That was when I realized my husband didn't just cheat. He lived a double life. Over the years, I pieced together more fragments. Hotel bills in cities he had no reason to visit. jewelry receipts for items I never saw, even emails clumsily deleted but not well enough that hinted at rendezvous with women I would never know. Most of them were transactional relationships. Prostitutes, mistresses bought with lavish vacations and designer handbags. Women who fed his insatiable lust for novelty, for control, for power, and, through it all, I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I believed I was protecting something greater. Our children, our family name, the empire we built together. I poured myself into our businesses, growing our real estate holdings, ensuring our children had the best education, the most secure future. I invested in therapy alone, quietly trying to understand why he couldn't love me the way I deserved, why I wasn't enough. One day, years ago, my eldest daughter confronted me. She had noticed the coldness between us, the silent meals, the separate bedrooms. She looked me in the eyes and asked, "Why do you humiliate yourself for him?" I swallowed my pain and gave the answer I thought was noble, for the good of the family, but now I see. That wasn't noble. It was survival then, as fate would have it. Just days before our golden anniversary, I discovered the final betrayal. Renato was planning to transfer a significant portion of our joint assets to a woman half his age, a mistress he had been seeing for over 15 years. 15 years. She had been at our family parties, disguised as an acquaintance. I had shaken her hand, smiled at her, never knowing that she was the one he was building a second life with. That discovery broke whatever thread of loyalty I had left. No more silence. No more protecting his image. No more sacrificing myself for the illusion of a marriage that never really existed. So I made a decision. I gathered everything I had quietly collected over the years, the financial records, the photos, the membership card to the club, the hotel, receipts, the emails. I organized it all into a folder, meticulously, methodically, like the businesswoman I had always been, and I waited the night of our anniversary. After he made his cold confession in private, I returned to the celebration. My heart was pounding, but my face was calm. I stood up, tapped my glass gently to get everyone's attention. The room, still filled with laughter and champagne, slowly fell silent. I took a deep breath, and then I exposed everything. I told them about the affairs, about the secret bank accounts, about the club he had frequented for decades. I held up the documents, the photos, the evidence, and let the truth speak louder than my voice ever could. The applause from earlier was replaced by an unbearable silence. People looked at each other in shock, disbelief, and then pity. Renato's face turned pale. He tried to deny it, of course, but the evidence was irrefutable. Our children, they didn't even look surprised. Perhaps they had always known, deep down, what kind of man their father really was. Friends, colleagues, people we had built our life around all stared at him with disgust, disappointment, some even with relief that the mask had finally fallen. In that moment, his carefully curated reputation of a devoted husband, a successful businessman, a family man crumbled to dust, and I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Powered, for the first time, I wasn't the woman holding everything together. I was the woman tearing down the walls of a prison I had lived in for 50 years. If you've ever felt trapped in a relationship built on lies, if you've ever been used, silenced, or made to believe that your pain didn't matter, know this: your truth is your power. That night, I didn't just expose Renato. I liberated myself. And that was only the beginning, because what I chose to do next would redefine the rest of my life. Stay with me. You need to hear how this story ends. It might just change the way you see your own life. Forever, the moment. I finished speaking. The room stood frozen silent, breathless, as if time itself had stopped. And then, it happened. Renato stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. His face contorted with something I had never seen before. Not love, not regret, but raw, naked panic. His voice, usually so composed, so rehearsed, broke into desperate, angry fragments. "Stop it. Stop. You don't know what you're doing," he screamed, his hands trembling as he pointed at me like I was the criminal. "Helena, enough. You'll ruin everything, everything we built. Everything we built." The irony of those words cut deeper than any betrayal. Because it had always been me building, me holding it all together, me sacrificing while he had only been taking. I stood there, steady, my hands gripping the papers that told the story he had worked so hard to bury. My eyes filled with tears, but I refused to let my voice break. Not now, not after all these years. "You destroyed the love," I said, my voice slicing through his screams. Through the thick, suffocating air of the room. "Now the truth will destroy the mask you've worn for 50 years. His face twisted, first in rage, then in disbelief, and finally In fear, he lunged forward as if trying to snatch the documents from my hands, as if he could erase the evidence, the years, the pain, with one desperate grasp. But I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Please, he choked out, his voice cracking, into something I could barely recognize. Please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can fix this. But we both knew there was nothing left to fix. He dropped to his knees right there in front of me, in front of every one of our children, our friends, colleagues, all the people he had spent a lifetime performing for. But he didn't fall in repentance, didn't collapse out of love or sorrow. No. He fell because he had lost the only thing he had ever truly cared about, his image. The carefully curated illusion of the perfect husband, the successful man, the doting father, it was gone. Stripped away in seconds by the one person he never thought would stand up to him. Me, his sobs filled the room, loud and ugly, shattering the suffocating silence. People averted their eyes, unsure whether to pity him or despise him. Our children, they didn't move. They just stood there, frozen, processing the truth their mother had finally laid bare. And I stood over him, watching this man. I had spent my whole adult life with unravel. There was a time when seeing him like that would have broken me, when his tears would have made me rush to comfort him, to protect him, to preserve the image of our family at all costs. But not anymore, because now I saw him for what he really was, not a man consumed by love for his family, but a man consumed by love for himself, and for the power and status that came with being my husband. In that moment, I realized something that I want every woman listening to understand. Sometimes, the person who claims to love you the most is the very person who is slowly stealing your soul, one silent compromise at a time. He screamed again, his voice raw. Helena, please, don't do this to me. To us, as if there had ever been an us. Double quotes. No, Renato, I said, leaning in just enough for only him to hear my final words. You did this to yourself, and then I straightened my spine, wiped the single tear that had dared to fall, and walked away. He remained there, on his knees, shaking, sobbing, broken not because he had lost me, but because he had lost the only thing that had ever mattered to him, the approval, the admiration, the applause of the world around him. But the world was no longer applauding. The room had become a tomb, echoing with nothing but the sound of his collapse, and me. For the first time in 50 years, I felt alive. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever stood in front of someone who claimed to love you, only to realize they loved the mask you wore, the role you played, more than they ever loved you, then you know this feeling, that terrifying, liberating, soul-shaking moment when you finally stop being silent me. His sobs filled the room, loud and ugly, shattering the suffocating silence. People averted their eyes, unsure whether to pity him or despise him. Our children, they didn't move. They just stood there, frozen, processing the truth their mother had finally laid bare. And I stood over him, watching this man. I had spent my whole adult life with unravel. There was a time when seeing him like that would have broken me, when his tears would have made me rush to comfort him, to protect him, to preserve the image of our family at all costs. But not anymore, because now I saw him for what he really was, not a man consumed by love for his family, but a man consumed by love for himself, and for the power and status that came with being my husband. In that moment, I realized something that I want every woman listening to understand. Sometimes, the person who claims to love you the most is the very person who is slowly stealing your soul. One silent compromise at a time, he screamed again, his voice raw. Helena, please, don't do this to me. To us, as if there had ever been an S. Asterisk. No, Renato, I said, leaning in just enough for only him to hear my final words. You did this to yourself. And then I straightened my spine, wiped the single tear that had dared to fall, and walked away. He remained there on his knees, shaking, sobbing, broken not because he had lost me, but because he had lost the only thing that had ever mattered to him, the approval, the admiration, the applause of the world around him. But the world was no longer applauding. The room had become a tomb, echoing with nothing but the sound of his collapse. And me. For the first time in 50 years, I felt alive. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever stood in front of someone who claimed to love you, only to realize they loved the mask you wore, the role you played, more than they ever loved you, then you know this feeling, that terrifying, liberating, soul-shaking moment when you finally stop being silent. That was my moment, and I promise you, it is worth everything. Because when the mask falls, when the lies crumble, what's left isn't just the ruins of their illusion. What's left is your freedom. And that is something no one can ever take from you again. Stay with me, because what I chose to do after this moment was even more powerful, and you need to hear it. I walked out of that hall without looking back, my children at my side, their hands holding mine not in pity but in solidarity. Renato stayed behind, alone, surrounded by the ruins of the illusion he had spent a lifetime protecting. In that instant, I realized I was free. The marriage, of course, ended officially weeks later, but in my heart, it had ended long before that night. What I signed on paper was just a formality, a closing of a chapter that had already been burned to ashes. I sold part of the businesses, the ones we had built together, because I didn't want my life to be chained to memories of him. I traveled. For the first time alone, standing at the edge of oceans I'd never seen, breathing air that wasn't poisoned by lies, I laughed with my grandchildren, held them tight, and told them stories, not the ones about fairy tales or perfect marriages, but about strength, truth, and the courage to walk away when something is breaking you. But more than anything, I started telling my story. At first, it was just to a few friends. Then 2 groups of women, some married, some divorced, all carrying their own versions of silent pain. I saw myself in their eyes, that same flicker of doubt. Is it me? Am I the problem? And I told them what I had finally learned after 50 long years, no. The problem is never love. The problem is when we try to force it to survive in places where it was never real, living a lie. That is what destroys you quietly, day by day, moment by moment. Until you forget who you are, I will never forget that night. But I don't hold anger anymore, only clarity. And now, I live my truth. So if you're listening to this, wondering if you're strong enough to walk away, to stand up, to speak out, let me tell you, you are. You always have been. And freedom. Freedom is worth everything. For so many years, I wore silence like armor, convincing myself that preserving the image of a perfect family was more important than my own happiness. I became an expert at swallowing pain, at justifying his betrayals, his absences, his coldness. All for the sake of our children, for the sake of stability. But after that night, standing in front of all those people, exposing the truth I had buried for decades, I realized something that changed me forever. I was no longer the woman who tolerated, who endured, who sacrificed herself quietly. I had become the woman who chooses herself. I learned that the kind of lust my husband carried, lust for status, for power, for appearances, was far more dangerous and corrosive than any physical addiction. It consumed him from the inside out, turning him into a man who could fake love for 50 years, only to confess that I had been nothing but a means to an end. But me, I chose differently. I chose dignity over appearance, freedom over fear, and truth over silence. This transformation wasn't easy. It felt like learning to breathe again after holding my breath for half a century. But I did it now. I dedicate my life to helping other women who are still trapped in those suffocating relationships, those who believe they have to keep enduring, that it's too late to start over. To them, I say it is never too late. You can always choose yourself. You can always walk away from what destroys you, no matter how long you've stayed, no matter how many years you've invested, and that's what I've become. A woman who refuses to let another generation suffer in silence. A woman who speaks, a woman who lives, and a woman who now teaches. Never is it too late to choose you. If you're hearing this, maybe it's your time too. And you, how much longer will you keep sacrificing your happiness just to maintain a lie? How much longer will you pretend that everything is fine, when deep down you know it's not? I spent 50 years trapped in that illusion, believing that the image, the family, the stability were more important than my own soul. But let me tell you something, I learned too late. Repressing the pain, hiding the truth only delays the inevitable. The cracks in the foundation only grow deeper with time. The silence becomes heavier. The nights become colder. And one day, everything collapses. So, I ask you, are you living for yourself or for the image you think you're supposed to uphold? If you feel trapped in a relationship that looks perfect from the outside but is hollow within, I see you. I understand your fear, the fear of starting over, of being judged, of breaking what you've spent years building. But listen carefully. Your happiness matters. Your truth matters. The longer you suppress it, the more you lose yourself. So here's what I invite you to do: one simple, yet powerful step. Today, reach out to someone you trust. It could be a friend, a therapist, a family member, anyone who will listen without judgment. Share your doubts. Speak your fears out loud. Because the first step to freedom is acknowledging that you deserve more. That you deserve a life built on truth, not pretense. You might not be ready to make a drastic change today, but by voicing your reality, you begin to reclaim your power. I was trapped for 5 decades. You don't have to be. Take that first step for yourself, for your future, because you are worth a life of authenticity, joy, and peace. And I promise, the truth will set you free. And if it terrifies you now, your story is still being written. Make it a story you're proud to tell. Here at Confession Stories, we are more than a channel. We are a family, a safe space where no one fights their battles alone. Your story, your pain, your triumph. It all matters. If you have been through something like this, or if you are still struggling in silence, share your story in the comments. No one here will judge you. We read every word, feel your heart, and together we heal. This is where we turn pain into hope, and brokenness into strength. Subscribe to the channel and keep watching this video that is currently playing on your screen.